How has ECO/CLA impacted the way you think about and train Jiu Jitsu? Ecological training and the constraints-led approach has completely transformed every single aspect of how I look at Jiu Jitsu and really opened my eyes to just how wrong I think a lot of Jiu Jitsu instructors and how a lot of Jiu Jitsu coaches are teaching Jiu Jitsu. And there's a couple reasons why. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Setless Strength Podcast. We got a Q&A episode today, and I'm not exactly sure how often I'm going to be doing these solo Q&As with you guys, but I love getting your guys' questions. I love when you guys are dropping questions on Instagram, on YouTube. Some of you guys are dropping questions in the Strength Matrix community. So if you guys have questions, I want to be able to help you out and answer your questions. And I think the best thing about these Q&A episodes is that sometimes someone will ask a question that I know for a fact there's got to be like 20 other grapplers out there that also have the same question. And so this allows me to take in your guys' questions, blast out my answer or my breakdown for you guys, so that way all you guys can benefit. This episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by thestrengthmatrix.com. If you want to enhance your grappling athleticism, if you want to feel and perform your best, if you want to get jacked and dangerous on the mat, the Strength Matrix is going to be your one-stop shop for all of that stuff. If you want to get started with the Strength Matrix for free, you can go to thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler. Check out the Grappler Accelerator training program. Has everything you need to kickstart your grappling athleticism over the next 30 days. Full strength and conditioning program, simple and clean diet guide, a super sleep toolkit, recovery protocols, everything you need to start building some strength, stimulating some muscle growth, and improving your conditioning. Again, that's at www.thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler. Now, without further ado, let's go and dive into the first question. This question is from Joe Watson _. How has ECO/CLA impacted the way you think about and train Jiu Jitsu? It's honestly changed everything for me. I would go as far to say that ecological training and the constraints-led approach has completely transformed almost every single aspect of how I look at Jiu Jitsu, how I look at submission grappling, how I coach, how I train myself. Like, it's changed everything. And there's a couple reasons why. When I was wrestling, I had a couple different wrestling coaches, and thankfully I never really had a bad wrestling coach. Some wrestling coaches were better than others, but I never had a coach that was like all around terrible. And so I feel very blessed that I can say that I've learned a lot from each of those wrestling coaches. Yes, I learned wrestling, but I also learned a lot about their different coaching styles and how they just curated skill development in each practice. Some coaches were very big on drilling, just reps. Other coaches were more on the side of like, hey, we're going to do a little bit of technique work, and then we're just going to do live wrestling or live goes the rest of the time. Some people were kind of like a mix in between, like 1/3 of practice was, technique, 1/3 of practice was like harder drilling, 1/3 of practice was all conditioning. And there was one wrestling coach in particular. This was the last wrestling coach that I had. So the coach that I had for my last several years of wrestling. And he did a lot of stuff that I think a lot of people would just look at as like, oh, that's just situational training. And I haven't talked to him in years, so I don't know if he's familiar with the constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics and all that stuff. But one thing that I liked about his practices was it's like, hey, we just learned this high crotch to a single leg takedown or high crotch to a double. We're going to drill it a couple times against a non-resisting training partner just to get a feel for the movement, get a feel for like, hey, this is where we kind of want to be on the hips, this is kind of where we want to be on the legs and all that stuff. But then we're going to start adding some resistance. And when he would add resistance, I felt like those were the times where I was actually getting it. Like, yeah, like it's not going to be super easy for me to shoot in on that leg and cut to a double. I can do it against a non-resisting opponent, but that's not how it's going to happen in a match. And so kind of blending the two ends of the spectrum of just the technique, non-resistant opponent with trying to create that situation in a live environment, I really liked that. And so we would do all sorts of stuff. He would have us start in on a single leg. He'd have us start on a single leg, both knees down. He'd have us start on a single leg, fully sprawled out, hands locked, fully sprawled out, hands unlocked. So we'd start in all these different positions, and they were live goes pretty much the whole time. And I loved that kind of training. I felt like I got much better at wrestling doing it that way, as opposed to only doing live wrestling like a regular 6-minute match and only doing static drilling. Now, when I started doing Jiu Jitsu, it was very traditional, like 10-15 minute warm-up, technique for 30 minutes, static drilling against a non-resistant opponent, then open mat for 45 minutes. And I liked that. Like, I thought it was really fun, and I loved Jiu Jitsu. I loved Jiu Jitsu way more than I ever loved wrestling. But I was starting to have some issues with building the skills. Like, there were certain things that, like, I'd do the technique of the day, and I'd be like, okay, like, I see what we're doing. I'm practicing it against a non-resistant opponent. Try to do it in the open mat section of class or the live rolling section of class. Can't do it. And that was really frustrating for me because I was just having a hard time building those skills. Now, I had tried to figure out, like, how can I bring in some of the stuff I was doing in wrestling and bring that into my own training. And so I would, ask my training partners sometimes, like, hey, like, could we take turns starting on the back, kind of working from there? Because, I think if you only do, especially if you're brand new, if you only do live open mat training and you're a brand new guy, how often do you ever make it to someone's back as a white belt? Hardly ever. And then once you do, the one chance you do get on someone's back, you don't really know what to do because you haven't really spent much time there. And so a great way to, strengthen those weaknesses and to build out your skills is to spend more deliberate time in those positions that you're weak at. And so I started trying to mix that into my own training. And it was just as simple as like, hey, you start on my back. If you submit me, we switch top bottom. If I submit you, reset, so on and so forth. And I would do that from all sorts of positions like back control, side control, mount. Sometimes I do it from half guard or like a specific guarded position, but most of it was from different dominant pinning positions. Mount, side control, back control. I don't think I ever really did it from north-south. And here's where everything changed for me. In 2022, it was Christmas Eve, December 2022, I tore my LCL on my right knee. I had put someone, I've told this story like 100 times already, but in case you haven't heard it, I put someone in a calf slicer and I blew my own knee out because I didn't understand the risks of that position. So I blew my knee out. That freaking sucked. Can't really train jiu-jitsu at all for about 8 weeks, I think. I don't think I stepped on the mat for too much straight. I might be getting some of the timeline a little bit mixed up. But anyways, once I could feel good enough to where it's like, hey, like I can walk okay, I can do some stuff in the gym, like it still hurts quite a bit, but like it's not, I can get around just fine. I immediately wanted to get back on the mat, but I knew that I couldn't just go back right into live rolling or even just regular technique work because my knee was still pretty severely injured and it was still, those tissues were still rebuilding and still recovering. And so what I did was I would just ask my training partners, I was like, hey man, like obviously I'm not going to be passing your guard because I can't really do that right now. So can I just start on your back and can we just work from there? Or can you start on my back and we work from there? And so I started doing those, if you want to call them like positional rounds like that. And I got really, really good in positions like mount, really good in positions like back, especially escaping those positions. But I wanted to take it one step further and try to like get more out of it. Like I didn't just want to only work towards a submission. I wanted to work towards like transitions between mount to back to mount again, or threatening different submissions to open up other opportunities. And so I started looking into Greg Souders and the stuff that he's doing at Standard Jiu-Jitsu. And I wasn't too familiar with ecological dynamics or the constraints-led approach. And that really changed for me when I started hearing a little bit more about what Greg Souders was doing. And then Greg Souders came to Sacramento and he podcasted with Mark Bell. I was able to meet him in person. He brought one of his students, Noah, and being able to learn from Greg in person really opened my eyes to just how wrong I think a lot of jiu-jitsu instructors and how a lot of jiu-jitsu coaches are teaching jiu-jitsu. It's almost like in the Matrix when Neo gets unplugged from the Matrix, and it's like, how can you ever look at the Matrix the same way again once you've been unplugged? You can plug yourself back in, like you can, go back into the Matrix, you could do all the dope stuff, but you're in the Matrix. Like once you know, there's no going back. And that's kind of how I felt with CLA and ecological training, mainly because it made me realize like, man, like this way that we've been doing it in jiu-jitsu for years is so inefficient. And honestly, it's a giant waste of time. In my opinion, it's a waste of time. If I want to get better at jiu-jitsu, I don't see how doing 100 reps of a random move against a non-resistant opponent is going to have any benefit when it comes to me being able to do that against a resisting opponent. And I think a lot of people sometimes struggle to break from that old school way of thinking because it's like, it's how my instructor did it, it's how his instructor did it, so on and so forth. And it's like, hey, like we all know that the martial arts that don't do any live sparring, we all know that they're a bunch of crap. We all know that they're ineffective. Like the martial arts that say like, we don't do that technique, it's too dangerous. It's like, buddy, I already know you don't know how to fight. I already know that like you're a scam. When we look at the history of martial arts, especially with the UFC, the coolest thing that the UFC did was like, hey, we're going to put these martial arts on blast. If you don't really know how to fight, if you don't actually train and like test your skills against live resisting people, you can't say that it's effective unless you actually test it. And the UFC proved that. Then obviously jiu-jitsu became insanely popular thanks to the UFC. But the weird thing is that jiu-jitsu just repeated the same problem in their traditional way of training and teaching. It's like, hey, here's a technique, practice the technique against a non-resistant opponent. Now, both of you guys resist each other 100% and see if it works. And it's like, there might be some correlation, like there might be some things where you could argue like, hey, because I saw the technique or because I familiarized myself with maybe some of these end points, so to speak, I'm able to try to like bridge the gap when I do my live rolling, trying to like focus on getting to those end positions. But I don't really think it works that well. If you're going to learn a knee cut pass or if you're going to learn a butterfly sweep, you have to do it against a live resistant opponent. That doesn't mean that you can't regress the complexity of it. That doesn't mean that you can't scale the difficulty or scale the task focus to make it a little bit more achievable and then make it, progressively harder. But if you just do it against a non-resistant opponent and then expect that it's going to work in a competition, good freaking luck, dude. It's probably not going to work. So all that to say, I think ecological training and the constraints-led approach has just completely changed the way I look at skill development in general. And I'd also say this too. I think people tend to hate on what they don't understand. And the people that kind of are like the loudest critics or the people that are the biggest naysayers against the constraints-led approach and ecological training or eco jiu-jitsu, which is not really a thing, but a lot of people call it that. The people that are the biggest haters on it, they don't understand it. And it's very clear that they don't understand it because they try to get into these debates with some people who are, big proponents of this style of training, and they're missing the forest from the trees a lot of the time. And they will say like, oh, it's just positional training. And it's like, okay, well, we can look at, it's not just positional training. You start in a position and you're training, but if positional training is you start in side control and you stop when there's a submission and that's it, okay, well, that's not what we're doing. There's a little bit more to it. There's more depth. There's more nuance. It's kind of like someone saying like, lifting isn't that complicated. You just go pick up heavy shit. Okay, well, a well-structured strength and conditioning program does include picking up heavy weights, but it's a little bit more nuanced. It's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more involved than that. And so in my experience, I have not met anyone who in good faith really tried to understand the constraints-led approach and really tried to understand what's going on with ecological dynamics and at the end of the day still think that drilling tons and tons and tons of reps against a non-resistant opponent is the best way to develop skill. I think at least everyone that I've talked to that's really tried to understand it, they usually walk away with the same sentiment that I had, which is like, hey, I think this is the best way to train. And then there's people in the middle that are kind of like dipping their toes in it, that think like, no, you need both. You need like live training, you need, constraints-based games, but you also need drilling. And I would go as far to say like, no, you don't. You don't need drilling at all. And the best example that I have to give of this is the first time I met Greg Souders and he did a seminar out here in Sacramento, he brought one of his students, Noah. At that point, when I first met Noah, I had been training for a long time. I think over 10 years between wrestling and Jiu Jitsu. I've been training for a longest time, I'll put it that way. And Noah had been training for 2 years, and he freaking cooked me on almost every single game. I think he won like 90% of the exchanges on these games, and he never drilled once. And that was all the convincing that I needed. It's like, how does this guy who's been training for 2 years just completely outclass me in all these different scenarios and constraint-based games that on paper I should be able to perform better because I've spent more time training on the mat. And even though I've spent more time training on the mat, that doesn't mean that all of that time training equated to a higher level of skill or a higher, that doesn't necessarily correlate to a higher level of skill development. And so that was all I needed to know. I was like, this guy freaking smoked me in most of these games and he doesn't drill. All right, I think I'm gonna stop drilling. And that's not to say like I'll never drill. Like sometimes when I still go to jiu-jitsu class, there's still instructors that they're still using a traditional format where they show a technique, you drill it, come back, show it part 2 of the technique or step 2 of the technique, drill that, come back, and then we do open mat afterwards. And if that's how they like to teach and that's their perspective on things, that's fine. Like I don't want to, I'm not hating on any of those people. I'm not saying that like they suck or anything like that. Like everyone has their everyone has their thing that they like, you know? I know for me, like how I train, I love lifting heavy. And there are other coaches out there that will look at my style of training and be like, how on earth can you still be lifting heavy? Don't you know that lifting heavy is going to injure you? Don't you know that lifting heavy is going to cause all these problems, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the day, it's like, honestly, like, I don't care. Like, keep talking that trash, dog. Like, I love lifting heavy and it's what I do. And I think sometimes people that really enjoy drilling because there's a thing where they feel like it equates to a certain volume of work being done. Like I got 100 reps of a knee cut, and then I got 100 reps of an X pass, and then 100 reps of a Toriano pass. I think for them, it's helpful for them, even though I don't think that's the most efficient way to develop skill. So hope that answers your question, Joe. Kind of went on a pretty long tangent there. All right, next question from Carlos M0X. Which exercises do you like the most to bulletproof the shoulders? This is coming at a great time because yesterday I recorded a podcast with Graham Tuttle. Graham Tuttle is the Barefoot Sprinter on Instagram. He has, I think Graham has probably like one of the best Instagrams for athletic development. He has so much good stuff on there. And in the podcast, I did ask him about his shoulder stuff because he's dislocated his shoulder 11 times and then has had a whole bunch of other subluxations and other shoulder injuries, AC joint separation. He's been through a lot with his shoulders. And he talked a lot about shoulder training and how the shoulders are such an integral part to, they're kind of like the intermediary between like our spine and what we do with our arms. And the best thing about the shoulder is that it can move in all these different ranges of motion and directions. The worst part of the shoulder is that it can move in all these different ranges of motion and directions. And that means that we need to train it to be durable and strong in all these different ranges of motions and directions. And he gave a really good list on different categories of exercises. I totally forgot the names of them. But the way that I look at shoulder training, which I feel like Graham did a great job of kind of like expanding upon that in much greater detail in our podcast, which will drop in a couple weeks. But the way that I look at shoulder training is like, hey, what are the main movements that our shoulder is involved in? Obviously, it's going to be pressing overhead, pressing horizontally. It's going to be involved in pulling horizontally, pulling vertically. And then your shoulder also does some other pretty cool stuff too. It moves away from your body. It's involved in pulling things closer to your body. It's involved in internal rotation, and it's involved in external rotation. And so if you just look at those things, that's a great like list for you to check off of like, hey, I should build strength in all these different areas. So I should build strength in pulling vertically and pulling horizontally. And how many different ways can I pull vertically and pull horizontally? I can pull palms down. I can pull palms up. I can pull palms neutral. I can pull with one arm. I can pull with both arms. I can pull and get like a huge stretch and get really extended on one side, pull and then fully crunch and coil on the other side. I can pull and twist in the middle of it. We can also take the same approach with pressing exercises. I can press palms down. I can press palms neutral. I guess you could press palms up. I don't really do that ever per se. We can press overhead. We can press and create a little bit of a coil in our spine when we do it. When it comes to internal rotation and external rotation, I can do that as part of like a single joint movement. I can also do that as part of like a compound movement, like a mace swing or a club swing. I can do one thing that Graham brought up yesterday on the podcast was different throwing exercises. And that's something that I definitely want to explore more of, is that if you can throw, not that you need to be like Tom Brady or anything like that, but if you can throw comfortably on both sides, that's pretty safe to say that your shoulders are in pretty good shape. I don't want to use the term bulletproof because I think that sometimes poorly communicates the idea that you're never going to get injured or that you're going to prevent injury, and there's no such thing as preventing injury. There's no such thing as avoiding injury, just decreasing your risk of injury. But if you incorporate all those things into your training, you incorporate some form of pulling, hanging, pressing, internal, external rotation, throwing, all that stuff can be great for overall shoulder health. Now, one thing that I think is really important is that you add a lot of variety in how you're training your shoulders. Your shoulders, there's so much stuff that connects to your shoulders. So it's not just your deltoid. And yeah, you can do like side raises and rear delt flies, all that good stuff. But your pec ties into your shoulder joint. Your bicep ties into your shoulder joint. Your lats kind of come around the shoulders. The muscles around your rib cage also gets tied in a little bit to that space around the shoulder. So there's so much that gets connected to the shoulder, and that means that you got to make sure that you're including enough variety in your training to make sure that you're kind of tackling all those different things. So if I were to give 3 exercises that I think are some of my personal favorites for building really, really strong shoulders, the first one is going to be a kettlebell bottom-up press. This exercise is not the best exercise for developing brutal pressing strength, but it will show if you have any sort of shoulder instability or mobility restrictions in the shoulder. The second exercise that I think is fantastic for building strong, healthy shoulders is going to be pull-ups. Pull-ups are fantastic for getting some of that hang position in, building strength in your lats, building strength in your upper back and your rear delts. And then the third exercise that I would recommend for strong, healthy shoulders is going to be loaded internal and external rotation. I think building the strength of your shoulder to internally rotate and externally rotate is going to be really, really important for grappling athletes, especially since there's so many submissions that implement some form of extreme external rotation or internal rotation on the shoulder. Next question from AJ Bovo. How many days per week is the Mattjacked program? So the Mattjacked program is inside the Strength Matrix. That is our hypertrophy and strength program. It's probably my all-time favorite training program inside the app right now. I freaking love it. I had so much fun going through it. And it is a 12-week training course, and it's 3 days per week with 1 bonus day of conditioning. It follows a condensed conjugate training program, and all throughout those 12 weeks, day 1 is going to be your max effort lower, dynamic effort upper training session. So we do something pretty heavy for the lower body, something fast and explosive for the upper body. Day 2 is going to be the same thing, but it's going to be flipped on its head. So day 2, you do something really heavy for the upper body, something fast and explosive for the lower body. Day 3 is pretty fun. That's a full body jacked and tan day. We're really pushing for hypertrophy, really pushing to stimulate as much muscle growth as possible. So that training program is 3 days a week. I followed it to the T for 12 weeks, doing 3 training sessions per week, and got some fantastic results. However, some of you may not have 3 strength and conditioning sessions available to you each week, so you may need to dial that back a little bit. If you can only get to the gym twice a week, you can still go through the Mattjacked training program. All you would have to do is, okay, say you go to the gym Tuesday, Thursday, and you do Jiu Jitsu the rest of the days. Well, on Tuesday, you do day 1. On Thursday, you do day 2. The following Tuesday, you do day 3. Then the Thursday after that, you run it back on day 1, so on and so forth. So as long as you're following the training sessions in sequential order, you're going to be totally fine. It may take you a little bit longer to finish the training course as a whole, but that's okay. As long as you're sticking to the diet, sticking to the other principles of hypertrophy that are included in that training course, you're still going to be able to pack on slabs of muscle. You're still going to be able to get brutally strong, still going to be able to improve your mobility. If you wanted to add the bonus conditioning in there too, you're still going to be able to build out some of that aerobic base and some of that work capacity. It's, again, one of my all-time favorite training programs. You can go to thestrengthmatrix.com to check that out. All right, a couple more questions here. Atlas_Meadow asks, what's your opinion on using Bulgarian split squats as a primary movement pattern? Well, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Bulgarian split squats. Like, that's one of my all-time favorite exercises. I don't really understand why people hate it so much. People are such crybabies about Bulgarian split squats. Like, oh my gosh, it hurts so bad. And I don't know. I love that exercise. And I think I would say the exercise that I make every single athlete do, unless they're a paraplegic, which I have not had an athlete be a paraplegic just yet. But every athlete does Bulgarian split squats. Every single athlete that I coach does some form of a Bulgarian split squat because it's just such an amazing exercise. Now, when it comes to using the Bulgarian split squat as a primary movement pattern, you can, and there's a few different ways that we can break this down. It really just all depends on what your training goals are and kind of where you want your training to end up over the course of 12, 16, 24 weeks. So if we're looking at a traditional conjugate training style or a conjugate system training approach, so we got the max effort method, dynamic effort method, and repetition effort method. When it comes to the max effort method, we typically want to pick a compound lift for the upper and lower body, working up to a 1 to 5 rep max. The main goal of the max effort method is to strain against some really heavy ass weights, to really stimulate the recruitment of a bunch of those muscle fibers and motor units, stimulate our central nervous system to produce as much force as possible. Now, when we do a unilateral exercise, we're using a lot less of our musculature, which means that we're producing a lot less force overall, and we're using a lot less load overall. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but that is something that we need to take into consideration. So I have used the Bulgarian split squat as a max effort lift in the past for a lot of grapplers, mainly because sometimes it's doing super, super heavy barbell back squats doesn't feel great. So doing like a super heavy Bulgarian split squat feels a little bit better, and we can use it for the same purpose of working up to a 1 to 5 rep max as your max effort main lift. That can work. I still think it's important to get strong in bilateral squat patterns like back squat, front squat, Zercher squat, box squat, belt squat, all that stuff. But again, I kind of take it as a case-by-case basis. When I first start working with an athlete, I typically don't have them max out on Bulgarian split squats as their max effort main movement. What I will do is I'll put it as their max effort secondary movement. So for example, I might have someone do a Zercher box squat, working up to a 5 rep max, and then I'll say, hey, once you're done with your Zercher box squat, go over to the dumbbell rack, and I want you to do 3 heavy sets of 5 on Bulgarian split squats. So it's their secondary movement. And remember, I've talked about this before on a lot of other old conjugate videos, but there's a few different ways that we can pick secondary exercises. The first way we can pick a secondary exercise is to just tackle something that we didn't necessarily hit in the max effort main movement. So if we did a partial range of motion bilateral squat movement for the max effort main movement, well, for our secondary movement, we can pick an exercise that doesn't do that. So it could be unilateral, working through a full range of motion, and the Bulgarian split squat fits perfectly in there. The other ways that we can pick a secondary movement is we can pick a variation of the main movement. So say you do a Zercher squat, or say you do a Zercher squat working up to a 5 rep max. Secondary movement would be a Zercher pause squat, 3 sets of 5. And then the last way that we can pick a secondary movement is by just working on one of the weaknesses that was presented in the main movement. So if you do a Zercher box squat, work up to a 5 rep max, you're watching your set afterwards, you're like, oh man, I can kind of see like my upper back is rounding forward, my posture's kind of weak. Okay, well then your secondary movement needs to address that weakness. So a Zercher good morning or an SSB good morning, something like that. So we can use the Bulgarian split squat as a max effort main movement. Don't necessarily recommend it for a whole lot of athletes, but it is a great thing to mix in as a max effort secondary movement. And then it also works really well for dynamic effort stuff. You can do Bulgarian split squat jumps with just your body weight for some dynamic effort training. And then it also works really well with the repetition effort method to further help stimulate hypertrophy and all that good stuff. Okay, last question. Is end range strength best for sports like Jiu Jitsu? I don't think it's a matter of whether or not it's best or worst, but I do think it's important. And I do think that training end range strength is an aspect of strength training that is severely missed by most grappling athletes. And I would also go as far to say that a huge reason on why grapplers get injured so often is because they don't have end range strength. It's important that we build strength through a full range of motion. No one ever got injured because they were too strong. And the only reason why someone would get injured is because they're not strong enough to receive the forces that are being applied to them. A lot of times when people tear their bicep, they don't tear their bicep when their arm is closed like this, super close to their body. They often tear their bicep when their arm gets extended in an arm bar, or if they're doing a deadlift and they have this palm up position, they do a deadlift, biceps extended, boom, snaps off the bone. They're doing some sort of like throw, or they get I've heard of some people tearing their bicep because they get like a deep underhook. That underhook gets extended, boom, bicep snaps off. The common thing on when a bicep snaps off the bone like that is that it's often extended. It's at end range, and it can't handle the forces that are being applied to it. And so one thing that is so important for grapplers, especially since so much of what we do is so close, like there's a lot of flexion, there's a lot of like pulling everything close to your body. There's already so much of that in the training that we do on the mat. It's important that we also get exposed to the opposite of that, or the other side of that spectrum, which would be training to get strong at some of these end ranges. And so I'm a huge proponent of doing exercises that work the muscles through a full range of motion, doing different types of pauses and isometrics at those end ranges, because that's really going to be what is helpful in stimulating strength of those tissues at those end ranges. And I think that, I don't want to say that end range training is best per se. I don't think it's necessarily like, oh, this is best, this is worse. I think it's more so about what is most appropriate for your training needs. As a jiu-jitsu athlete, we do so much stuff where we're in this flexion position, keeping everything close. So what is an athletic weakness that we need to develop to be a more well-rounded athlete and further decrease our risk of injury? Well, that would be building end range strength, building strength at some of these extreme ranges of motion, so that way our tissues are prepared to receive force and not be so susceptible or at such a great risk of injury. I do think, I will put this caveat in there, I do think that sometimes people will take the end range training a little too far. Like they'll put themselves in these, they'll make up these crazy exercises. They're like, oh, I'm getting like the greatest stretch mediated hypertrophy ever. And it's like, okay, I see you doing that, but you're only using 10 pounds. And I think if you just did like a more normal looking exercise with 50 pounds, you'd probably get a better result. That's not the case for everything, but I just think that as like in the strength and conditioning industry, as these trends kind of come and go, we'll see stuff like, oh, it's all about the stretch, all about end range. And so they do some crazy exercise that they can only use 10-pound dumbbells with. And it's like, if you just did a regular lift or the regular version of that lift and used a 50-pound dumbbell, I think you'd probably get some better results. So that question was from Juan Pim XJP. So Juan, I hope that answers your question. And that's it for today's Q&A. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Lift heavy, roll hard. Catch y'all later. Peace.